Well, what do we have here today? Let's see what today's story brings us, shall we? Here we go. Have you ever woken from a particularly bad dream and been thankful that it wasn't real? That those things just don't happen in the real world? I know I have. But what I want to tell you about is not a nightmare. I wasn't asleep. It was real. It was real. It was terrifying. And while it was one of my most terrifying events, it was also the creation of one of my greatest regrets. It's been about 16 or 17 years since this occurred, but I never fully recovered from it. Even now, all these years later, sometimes these events come to mind and my heart breaks all over again. You know how it is when you're young. Adventure always pulls you in, and I was no different. I worked at the same place as one of my best friends at the time, and we came up with the idea that since we had vacation time coming up at the exact same time, that we would go on an adventure. We would go someplace we'd never been before and make a road trip out of it. Sounds normal enough. Sounds like fun. And so we headed off with smiles on our faces and light hearts out onto the open road. We had decided to go somewhere that was about halfway across the state in which we lived. When we got there, we couldn't find a room, so we decided we would camp. Since the area we were in was mostly wooded and pretty much stuck in time, this place was still full of gravel roads. I can't even count the number of roads that we found that were gravel instead of paved. It was odd, but at the same time, it had a kind of charm to it, so we couldn't resist staying, at least for a couple of days. And then, if we didn't find anything of interest there, we could always move on to the next town, which was much bigger. So, we decided to try to find a place to camp. As we were traveling these dirt roads in search of a place to set up shop for the couple of nights that we had planned to stay, we came to a strange road. It bordered national parkland, but there was logging on the other side. We decided to see how far the road went. There was absolutely no traffic of any kind, and we thought it was rather pretty. Even the weather seemed to be cooperating with our plans, as the rain that had been forecasted had moved away from the area and the sky was clear and sunny. We ventured on up this dirt road until we came to a crossroads. Oddly enough, we had seen no traffic, none whatsoever, so we were taken aback when we looked across the road, and across the intersection sat a vehicle that looked decrepit, but yet we could see what appeared to be a child, a little girl. The problem wasn't the vehicle, which looked to either be broken down or possibly abandoned by someone to rot there. The problem was the little girl. When I first noticed her, I honestly thought something was terribly wrong with me, because she didn't look normal. When I looked at her, she seemed to phase in and out of existence, as if she existed on some other plane and was having trouble holding her physical presence in this world. It was creepy. It was odd. I didn't know what to make of it, and I sat frozen behind the wheel, my foot on the brake, terrified to move. She was just standing there, her eyes meeting mine, in the middle of the road, alone. I didn't see anyone else around, but like I said, I was frozen. I couldn't figure out why my eyes were having problems seeing her. When she finally faded into full existence and seemed to be solid again, I could see what she was wearing. I could see her hair, its color. She looked to be about 6 years old. Not a very big child. Tiny little thing, actually. And even that seemed odd, way out in the middle of nowhere. There were no houses back here. The loggers had apparently left. There was no equipment sitting around. There was no sign of anybody anywhere except for that lone vehicle. And in my mind, trying to make a rational thought out of what was seemingly irrational, I figured she must be with the people that were somewhere near the vehicle, even though I couldn't see them, and they were just waiting for someone to come along and help them. But for some reason, I don't know if it was the situation with not being able to fully see her at first, or just the appearance of the vehicle itself, I didn't feel right. As a matter of fact, I felt pure terror. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I was truly terrified. I sat there for several seconds, possibly even a minute, staring at this little girl, when suddenly I felt a movement against my arm. It was my friend in the passenger seat. She reached over and put her hand on my arm and whispered in a terrified way, "Do you see that? What's wrong with her? Is she real?" I didn't know what to do. It was then that I realized it wasn't just me that had seen what I had just saw. Her startlement of me sent me into motion, and I quickly stomped down on the gas pedal. As the dust in my rearview mirror obscured the scene behind us, I started to come back to myself. We went up the road to the next intersection, probably only about a mile and a half away, and we talked about what we had both seen. I asked her what she thought she had saw and what had scared her so bad, and she relayed the situation to me. Ironically, it was exactly the way I had seen it. She even saw how the little girl seemed to fade in and out of existence. We talked about it and decided that one of two things had occurred. Either the child was really there and something terribly wrong was occurring, or we had had some type of mass hallucination, which didn't seem likely since we were under the influence of nothing heavier than Mountain Dew and Doritos. We debated on whether or not we should go back, try to find out what was happening. Maybe, just maybe, it was the way the light was hitting the child, and there were truly people there that needed our help, especially in a place like this. And we thought about it, but both of us were too afraid to go back. So, we went ahead and went back to the town itself, got off of the back roads for a while, and decided we would come back later after we had found something to eat and calmed down. Maybe by then, the vehicle would be gone, and it would turn out to be nothing at all. So that's exactly what we did. We went back to a corner store, got some Doritos and Mountain Dew again, and then about 4 hours later, after riding some more back roads looking for the perfect place to camp, we decided to go back. It was getting dark, but it was still in the dusk stage and more than bright enough to see. We would be able for at least another 2 hours to not only see what was going on here, but still have enough daylight left to find a nice place to pull over and spend the night. We backtracked and found the road, turned up it, and before long we were back at the crossroads. But the vehicle was still there. It hadn't moved. So we decided we would go over to the other side of the road, pull in behind them, and see if we could help. Or at least find out whether or not there was anyone there. Like I said, it looked rather decrepit, so it could very well have been an abandoned vehicle as far as we knew. As we pulled in behind the vehicle, we didn't see anyone. There was no one in sight. We sat for a minute looking around, but since we could see no one, we decided to get out of the vehicle. Both of us were known to carry our own firearms, and so we got these out just in case, more because we were in the middle of nowhere than the situation itself. But both of us stepped out, gun in hand. I went ahead and took mine off the safety. I had a bad feeling. One of those feelings that when it hits, it spreads through your whole body. Looking back now, part of me wishes I had listened and just not even walked over there. Part of me that has grown older and wiser knows what that feeling is now. But youth and stupidity were all I had at that time. And it was through this experience that I learned to listen. When that feeling hits, that's your hint to walk away. But I didn't. In fact, I took the lead. I was walking about 10-15 feet ahead. I stopped when we heard what sounded like walking in the woods. I signaled to my friend behind me to stop and be quiet. She heard it too and started pointing in a direction. I looked, and there we saw two men, two rather large men in fact, walking through the woods. They were walking away from us and hadn't seemed to notice us, so we stood silently and watched. I focused in on the smaller of the two. He was still a head taller than me, but he had a bag, what looked like a burlap sack from where we were, over his shoulder. But whatever was in it was a deep, dark color, and it was wet. From where we stood, whatever was in the bag could have been dripping something, either red or black. It was a very dark color, and given the color of the bag that it was in, that could also make it much darker. We had grown up in a rural area, so we had seen deer hunters who didn't want the stench of decay around their home dump the entrails of their kills. And honestly, that's what I figured was happening. And I should have walked away. I should have turned around and left. But curiosity had gotten the better of us, and both of us decided to sneak up to the vehicle just to make sure. So that's what we did. I took the lead once again. My mind had gone back to that little girl. She wasn't with the men walking through the woods. So where was she? I didn't like the idea of her sitting in the vehicle, or possibly asleep in the car all by herself in the middle of nowhere. My curiosity wasn't just curiosity at this point. It was concern. As I stepped up to the driver's side of the vehicle, I noticed several things. First thing that I noticed was that there was no child inside the car. I motioned to my friend to stay where she was. She wasn't yet where she could see what I was seeing, and in all honesty, I wish that I could unsee it. The second thing I noticed was that the vehicle was absolutely full of odd things. I could see a grimoire of some type. That's about all I could read of the cover, as it was underneath a wet piece of cloth. I'm not sure what kind of book it was exactly, but it didn't look good. There was a whip. There was a crop. There were several leather apparatus that I can only describe as possibly coming from the BDSM community. I don't really know what they were or what they were for. And there were several other disturbing objects inside the vehicle. A rather large knife was also there. But the thing that disturbed me the most, beyond all the strange things inside the vehicle that I couldn't come up with an explanation for, was the blood. It was everywhere. It covered everything. The grimoire, the crop, the whip, even the whip handle was covered in blood. The knife, the floorboards, the seats, especially the back seat. There was some on the windows, and I froze, terrified, gun in hand, standing beside that car. A sound broke my reverie. My friend had walked up beside me, and as she drew in her breath sharply, the sound startled me. It brought me back to myself, and I realized that what I was looking at did not come from a deer kill. These were not the instruments of cleaning a deer. These had nothing to do with hunting. These were not hunters, at least not deer hunters. What they were hunting was much more precious. I realized two things in quick succession as I came back to myself. One, I could hear the walking in the woods again, and it was coming closer. And two, my friend was in shock. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing. I looked around to find the sounds of the footsteps, and it was the two men coming back toward us. As I saw them, so did she. They were moving much quicker, than when they had walked away. In a breathless whisper, my friend said, "Their faces. Where are their faces?" It was then that I realized I could see everything perfectly. The trees, the leaves. I could have given you an exact description of everything these two guys were wearing, but I could not see their faces. Their faces were a blur. I quickly started to move away from the vehicle and then realized she was still standing there. I ran back to her and shook her by the shoulders. I couldn't get her to move. She was still in shock. I didn't know what to do. If we didn't get out of there fast and get back to our vehicle, we were going to have a real problem. I made the decision in my mind that if it came down to it, and I had to, I would shoot. But I was going to do my best to get her back to the vehicle and get us out of there, if at all possible. I shook her a second time, and finally she began to come around. She was still stunned, but I was able to get her moving. Once I got her to move, and she began to realize and come back to herself that we were in a terrible situation, she began to run for the vehicle, and so did I. We got back inside, started it up, and I put it in gear just as the two men were reaching their vehicle. We still couldn't see their faces. I don't know why. It was odd. Everything else was in clear perspective, but we could see nothing where their faces should be. I put it to the floor, and we ran. It wasn't long, and the car was on the back of our vehicle, following closely behind. I pushed down on the pedal harder. I had a 4-wheel drive, and these gravel roads were no competition for it. The car started to fall back. It had no choice. When we finally escaped sight of the vehicle, we decided to go over to the next town and stay for the night. We didn't want to take a chance of either running into them or having them come up on us camping somewhere in the middle of the night. Neither one of us slept that night. We talked over everything that we had seen and tried to make ourselves believe that we didn't see what we thought we saw, and I wish that were true. Honestly, I had made up my mind that if when we went back nothing else happened, then it was probably no more than just a strange circumstance that looked like one thing but was really something else, something harmless. But the next day, when we went back to that town, we found out just how wrong we were. The car showed up again, and everywhere we went, it followed, and they watched us, and they waited. Shortly before dusk, we managed to lose them. Too scared to go back out on a main road, we decided that we would stay on a back road and camp on the side of the road. Again, another sleepless night. No sleeping under the stars on this trip. We slept in the vehicle. We were too scared to do anything else. The next morning, we decided to cut our trip short and just go home, where it was safe, where we knew everybody, and things like this just didn't happen. We had to go back down the main road to get to the interstate, and once again, out of nowhere, that strange vehicle was on our back bumper again. Terrified, I began to speed up the road, completely unconcerned for the speed limit. In fact, I wanted to be pulled over. I wanted to tell the cops, tell anybody. But the thing about it was, this town was too small to have a police department of its own. And unless we got lucky enough for one of the cops from the town next to it to be patrolling, as they were known to do on occasion, we were out of luck. We were on our own. There was enough traffic on the main road to keep us from losing them completely. But I figured once I reached the interstate, I could rectify that situation. But no such luck. These guys were tenacious, and I could not get away from them. There was just too much traffic on the interstate for me to weave through. They were never more than 2 cars behind us, and at every opportunity, they came back up on our bumper again. This went on all day. For hours, they just were not willing to let us go. I weaved in and out of traffic, thankful that I had got gas before they had come up on us in the last town we were in, the town where this had all happened. So I had enough gas to get us back to safety, but I just couldn't lose them. The traffic was too thick. I kept weaving, but I could never get far enough ahead for them to lose sight of us completely. It was late afternoon, and we were less than 60 miles from home. Less than 60 miles from where we would be exiting the interstate and taking these strange, scary people back to where we lived. That thought was terrifying. Neither one of us wanted these people to know where we were from, but we couldn't lose them. It was then that we came upon a convoy of tractor and trailers heading down the interstate together in a large group. There were 5 of them, and as we weaved in and out of traffic behind them and finally got up next to them, one of them must have noticed the situation, must have noticed something was wrong. The man in the tractor beside me said something on his radio and looked in his rearview mirror. As he moved back and slowed down, the tractor in front of him slowed down as well. He was in one lane and I was beside him in the other. He motioned for me to speed up. My friend told me to step on the gas, so that's what I did. As I did so, he cut the car off behind me, knowing that they wouldn't try to speed around him. As he cut them off, the tractor and trailer that was in front of him boxed me in on the other side. Then he motioned to my friend to tell me to speed up some more, so I did. Before long, we were behind one trailer and between 2 others that were behind us. There was no way they could get through the traffic. They waved and slowed down as the truck in front of us. They waved and slowed down as the man in the trailer in front of us motioned for us to go around him as well. Those truckers completely blocked the interstate off and slowed down to 40 miles an hour. As I hit up the interstate doing 80, they gave us a safe escape, and for that, I will always be grateful, and I wave at every trucker I see, just in case they were one of the ones who saved us that day. Once we got home, I had a lot of time to think about what I saw, to think about what had happened. Maybe I should have stopped the first time we saw that vehicle. Maybe that little girl was still alive. What happened? I'll never know. I still remember her face and the sweet way the curls fell down her cheeks. I'll never know what really happened, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. It's a regret I'll take with me to my grave. A regret and a sadness that every once in a while still falls over me and envelops me like a blanket. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't what it looked like. But if that had been animal blood, why would they have chased us halfway across the state? I can't let it go. It follows me. We probably could have helped her. We probably could have saved her. And now there's nothing left. Nothing left that I can do. I can't go back and fix it. I would if I could. I wish I could tell her that I'm sorry. Sorry that I didn't stop the first time. Sorry that I did nothing to help her. I'm sorry, and I wish that I could fix it. But that was a long time ago, and now I'm left to live with what came after. The sadness, the regret, the nightmares. This is a warning for all who would ignore that gut feeling that tells you something is wrong. Always listen to your gut, because sometimes it sees more than the eye can see. Well, that was sobering. Have you ever seen something terrifying and wished you could unsee it? Have you ever been in a similar situation and had the same regrets? Tell me about it in the comments below. What do you think was really happening? Did she see what she thought she saw? Or do you think something entirely different was occurring? I'm not really sure what I think about it. Tell me your interpretation of the story. Well, that's our story for today. Thanks for stopping by. Hey, this is Dead One Rollin saying thanks for stopping by and spending a little time with us here at the Macabre Motel, hanging out here in room 210. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. And thank you again for spending time with us. Hoping that you may always be a voyeur of the dark side and not a victim.